الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى سائر الأنبياء والمرسلين وتابعيهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت سيدنا محمد الوسيلة والفضيلة وشرفه والدرجة العالية الرفيعة وبث مقام المحمود الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد يا أرحم الراحمين رب اغفر لي ولوالدي 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 وارحمهما كما ربياني صغيرا اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا وحبيبنا وقرة أعيننا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي إياي بتقوى الله لا إله إلا الله أما بعد. My dear brothers and sisters, it's an honor to be with you all today, alhamdulillah, on the first Friday of Sha'ban, the blessed month of Sha'ban, in which we are awaiting, inshallah, the blessings and the outpouring of mercy of Ramadan, inshallah. And the Prophet ﷺ has mentioned that Sha'ban is often a neglected month, so inshallah, let us not be of those who neglect it. In one of our recent community gatherings, we were blessed by the visitation and the nasiha of one of our beloved teachers, one of our friends and brothers, Imam Amin. And for those who were there, those who weren't, in his remarks, he made comments or observations about what he felt was an important distinction between form and substance. And in his observation, his estimation, in visiting cities around the country, communities, including our own, he said when he looks out at an audience, he sees a lot more form than he sees of substance. And this distinction of form and substance, it is aligned or directly compatible with the paradigm that we have in Islam, Iman, and Ihsan, in which the Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam came to the Prophet in that hadith, and Islam, Iman, and Ihsan were differentiated, such as the differentiation or paradigms of Sharia, Tariqah, and Haqiqah. And so this form, substance, reality paradigm is one that we can use to evaluate all spheres of our religion, from the inward to the outward, whether it's our acts of worship, whether it's our spiritual states or how we speak about them, and everything in between. And in essence, when you're speaking about having form but not reality, or form but not substance, it's akin to the common metaphor that's used of having a body without a soul, or an outward form without inward life. And if we extend that metaphor further, or that simile further, anything that has a form but doesn't have life, it inclines towards or naturally predisposes towards decay, decomposition, that which is ugly, rotting. Whereas life brings about beauty and brings about restoration. And so we want to make sure that we understand this framework deeply, we inculcate it within our hearts, and that we apply it to everything that we approach in our faith. And one of the interesting points of observation that's made by the true arifin, the knowers of Allah, as we've heard from this minbar as well as in many other gatherings, is that our religion and everything it entails, the entire affair that we're engaged in, it all comes back to one matter in terms of a universal principle, which is love. And love is the principle or the apex, it's the pinnacle of all of it, unequivocally, unabashedly, without any sort of reservation, even though in many of our hearts, whether it's because of psychological shortcomings, emotional shortcomings, spiritual shortcomings, many of us are uncomfortable with that notion. We might find other ways to try to approach the religion, but not through the door of love. And love is essentially the peak of the matter. It is ra'su shay. It is the head of the matter. And this is clear from many sayings of the Prophet ﷺ, in which he mentions that none of us truly believes until we love Allah and His Messenger more than we love anything else. He even mentions in one tradition, one narration, more than his father, his children, and everything else that may be in the world. There is one narration, though, that I'd like us to focus on, in which he phrases it quite interestingly, and it's one point in there that we'll be addressing today, inshallah. So in one of these narrations, Rasulullah ﷺ says in the English translation, whoever possesses the following three qualities has tasted the sweetness of faith. And he literally says tasted, ذَاقَ حَلَاوَةَ الْإِيمَانِ, or in other narrations, طَعْمَ الْإِيمَانِ. And our wonderful madrasa students have learned this hadith recently, that the sweetness of faith is tasted by these individuals. And this is where we should perk up. Our ears should really pay attention. Whenever the Prophet ﷺ delineates categories of people that will either have something or be deprived of something, we really should pay attention to what's coming next. Because what he's about to do is give us the key to success or avoidance of failure. And again, this dhawq that he's referring to, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has the same exact parameters or the same framework can be applied of form, substance, and reality. So you can speak about tasting something, right? Which is very different from actually tasting it, or at least knowing what it tastes like. And then actually tasting it would be the pinnacle of the matter, and describing that to someone else, you can approximate that, but you may never get to it unless that person has tasted as well. And the arifin, or the scholars, have mentioned to us, including some of our teachers, that there were some of the righteous that actually even tasted the sweetness physically. They experienced the sweetness of faith on their tongues like honey. And so this is something that has a reality that is beyond what we can perhaps comprehend, but we believe in it and we affirm that it's true. And so in this hadith, he says that whoever possesses the following three qualities has tasted the sweetness of faith. ذَاقَ حَلَوَةَ الْإِيمَانِ. The one for whom God and His Messenger ﷺ are dearer than anything else. And that's unequivocal, anything else. One who loves a person and he loves him solely for God's sake. And one who hates to revert to a state of disbelief as he hates to be thrown to the fire. So again, these are realities. Each category of these statements is a reality that takes perhaps a lifetime to achieve, if ever. But it's something that is the condition, the prerequisite to tasting the sweetness of faith. And it's the second category that I'd like to focus on today. The one who loves a person and he loves him solely for God's sake. That those who love each other, al-hub fi sabilillah, or hubbu lillah, the love for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's something, again, that we have a lot of form, perhaps in our hearts, on our tongues, in the community, but which sometimes we lack substance or lack the reality of. And so, by way of a discussion on brotherhood and sisterhood of Islam, inshallah, we'll touch this briefly, although an entire weekend or week could be spent on the subject. And returning to that same framework, the words brother and sister, which we put as titles before, addressing our brothers and sisters, which we say frequently, they've, in a sense, lost some of their heaviness, some of their import, some of their meaning. And it's restoration of that is important. And this is not to be critical. So, for instance, this is not an intention or an endeavor to make us feel guilty about where we are. For indeed, we could spend the rest of the time listing and enumerating all of the beautiful ways in which brotherhood and sisterhood manifest themselves in our community and throughout the ummah. And so it's not to be unthankful for that, because we have that, alhamdulillah. Rather, it's about our framework. So it's more of a construct that we're trying to correct, so that our standard is not substandard, that we're level setting on where we know we should be, so that at the very least we walk away aspiring to something, and where we land, alhamdulillah for that. And so for that framework, for that concept, for the standard that we seek to achieve, let us look to our tradition in the words of the beloved of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the best of creation, who was gifted with something that he self-titled Jawami al-Kalim. Jawami al-Kalim would be this ability that you can call it pithiness in English, but it's not quite that either. It's the ability to compress, condense, consolidate, and deliver multiple deep, profound meanings with many layers in very few words or very short statements. And we see this throughout the hadith literature. There are long hadith, those of moderate length, but there are numerous hadith that are just a few words and they convey pages or volumes of meaning in those very few words. And so Imam al-Ghazali, he says because of this, that every word of his speech, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is an ocean from the oceans of wisdom. If a scholar or any of us contemplated it as it rightly deserves, he would continue studying it for the rest of his life. Every word of his speech, you could study it. And we know the stories of Imam Malik, that when the hadith were being relayed in his presence, or when he was relaying hadith, he would make wudu, he would wear his turban, wear the best scent, and he would sometimes shake or become physically, you would see the physical effects of that upon him. Again, the difference between form and reality, or form and substance. And so in this hadith, which we've heard often perhaps, but it bears repeating over and over, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم والذي نفسي بيده لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه من الخير. صلى الله عليه وسلم صدق رسول الله. So before we go into the hadith, I'll translate it, but we'll mention one very important point. So the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم said, والذي نفسي بيده, by the one in whose hand is my soul. This is a very beautiful way in which the Prophet ﷺ would articulate an oath, so it's swearing by Allah, but he would articulate it in such a manner as showing the gravity of the situation or the gravity of the subject he's about to address, and the magnificence or the azama, the jalal and the jamal of the one who is sending him to say this, or sending him as the messenger with these words. He said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَا يُؤْمِنُ أَحَدُكُمْ. None of you truly believes. And if you stop there, that would be a very disastrous statement, right? لا يؤمن أحدكم. None of you truly believes. Your faith is incomplete. And again, this is meant as a rhetorical device to have us pay attention very closely and to not use this lightly. Quoting hadith is a common device that's used among religious circles, but it's something that if you, again, have one of them in your hand and in your heart, then inshallah it suffices you if you reflect on it. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى, until يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. He loves for his brother or her sister what he loves for himself, min al-khayr. In some variations it stops there, but in this one, min al-khayr, from goodness. So Imam Abu Dawud mentions about this hadith in particular. Imam Abu Dawud says, and he has one of the Sihah al-Sitta, one of the core canonical books of hadith, he says that 500 ahadith he collected and wrote down. Of them, 4,000 were thabit. So again, 500,000 ahadith that he collected. Imam Bukhari, they say, collected 1 million or more. 4,000 of them were thabit, were sound, were rooted. And he said all 4,000 of those stem from 4 ahadith, or 5, according to some scholars, and this is one of them. So this is one of the pillars of the ahadith that lay the foundation for our religion. So it bears that we should memorize it, and then deeply reflect upon it, and then try to act upon it, even if word by word, and then try to instill it within our friends, in our children, in our spouses, in our homes, in our communities. This hadith bears not just repeating and memorizing, but implementing an entire life program around, and it's essential. And this hadith, you could say, in the sort of the modern world, one of the iterations we're familiar with hearing, especially in corporate contexts and other contexts, is the golden rule. The golden rule of treating others as you wish to be treated. When you look at our tradition, one of the amazing things is that this is not the golden rule. This is the basic premise, the most minimum essential component to have complete faith. Real success, real aspiration, real heights would be achieved through ithar, which is preferring others over oneself. So let's look further into the hadith literature for a few more ahadith regarding this very subject. So the Prophet ﷺ also said that we don't have to just love for them, we actually have to love our brothers themselves. He said, لا تدخلون الجنة, again, a very stark, negative or negating statement. لا تدخلون الجنة, you will not enter the garden. حتى تؤمنوا, until you believe. And we can refer back to the other hadith to understand that one of the basic criteria for that belief is the love for others. وَلَا تُؤْمِنُوا حَتَّى تَحَابُّوا. But not just loving for them, you won't believe until you love them themselves, your brothers, your sisters. أَوَلَا أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ إِذَا فَعَلْتُمُوهُ تَحَابَبْتُمْ. Should I not tell you of something that if you did it, you would love each other? أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ بَيْنَكُمْ. Spread peace amongst each other. And again, we look back, and these are simple things perhaps, or at least they've become simple for us. أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ بَيْنَكُمْ. The greeting of peace. Spread salam amongst yourselves. This is something we say 10, 20, if not hundreds of times a day, especially in a blessed community such as this, where we see each other often. Salam, salam, salam. But what does that salam mean? What does that salam really encapsulate? It is a prayer for peace. It is an assurance of peace. It is a contract. It is a bond between one and another. And then beyond the statement of salam, we are saying we want to actually spread salam, spread peace and a state of peace within the community, amongst each other, for each other, in the hearts of each other. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. And this is similar to the first hadith if we think about the enormity of what was happening. So when the Prophet ﷺ made hijrah from Makkah al-Mukarramah to Madinah al-Munawwarah, then known as Yathrib, of course everyone came out, whether they were Muslim or not. This included the children who were excited and they sang, and the men and the women, and even people of other faiths. And we have one narration from our beloved Sahabi Abdullah ibn Salam, who was at the time a Jewish rabbi. And he came out of curiosity to understand what is sort of the all of the commotion about, but also because he had an interest, a genuine interest in understanding if this was the prophesied one who is to come at the end of time. Al-Mab'uth, rahmatul alameen, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he believed that this could be him, and so he came to essentially evaluate that. And what were the first words that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to the people of Medina? He said, "Afshu salam, wa at'imu at-ta'am, wa silu al-arham, wa sallu wan-nasu niyam, tadkhulu al-jannata bi-salam." He said, spread the peace. Again, that very essential, formative component, without which our relationships and communities cannot withstand the test of living amongst each other. وَأَطْعِمُوا الطَّعَامِ, and feed each other food, whether people are in need of it or not, as a gift, as an invitation, as sadaqah, whatever it may be. وَصِلُوا الْأَرْحَامِ, and connect between, keep the ties of kinship. Make sure that you keep those connected tightly. Don't let them get loose, don't let them fade away. وَصَلُّوا وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامِ. All of that is interpersonal, social, at the horizontal. What do you need to do to maintain that and then to effectualize that? Keep a vertical relationship. صَلُّوا وَالنَّاسُ نِيَامِ. Pray when people are asleep. تَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةَ بِسَلَامٍ. You will enter paradise in peace, just as his statement started with peace, it ends with peace, and it concludes with peace. Now, what is the outcome of all of this? If we were to think about these three ahadith, just these three, ones that we learn as children, ones that we teach our children, ones that we often gloss over, the outcome would be two things that Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal has taught us. He said, قال الله عز وجل وجبت محبتي للمتحابين فيه والمتجالسين فيه والمزاورين فيه والمتبادلين فيه. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says through the words of our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that my love has become obligatory. Again, wajabat mahabbati. That Allah, when Allah Azza wa Jal says that something has become obligatory for Him to do, this is not something that we would say out of logic is necessary for God to do, but out of the shara', because Allah has told us this is how it's going to be. Therefore, it will not be undermined or countered in any way. That wajabat mahabbati, that my love has become obligatory for those who love each other in my sake, or for my sake, and those who sit with each other for my sake, and those who visit each other for my sake, and those who spend on one another for my sake. And Sayyidina Mu'adh also tells us, قال الله عز وجل المتحابون في جلالي لهم منابر من نور يغبطهم النبيون والشهداء. Speaking, that was a mahabba that will occur now and forever, inshallah. And what are some of its metaphysical or otherworldly realities or manifestations? Is that in the akhirah, those who love one another for Allah's sake, for Allah's glory, will be given or granted pulpits of light, manabira min nur, yaghbituhum an-nabiyyuna wash-shuhada, that the prophets themselves and the martyrs will feel jealousy towards people who have this special station, this maqam on the Day of Judgment. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us this. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولجميع المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي إياي بتقوى الله. يقول الله تعالى في كتابه المبين بعد أن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ذلك ومن يعظم شعائر الله فإنها من تقوى القلوب. ويقول أيضا وذكرهم بأيام الله. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, and whoever honors the symbols of Allah, it is certainly out of the piety of the heart in Surah Al-Hajj. ذلك ومن يعظم شعائر الله فإنها من تقوى القلوب. That whoever honors the symbols of Allah, the signs of Allah, the wayposts of Allah, whoever places great meaning in them, reflects upon them, holds them in high esteem, then that is from piety of the hearts. And he says also in reference to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam in Surah Ibrahim, remind them of the days of Allah, ayyamillah. So the sha'air of Allah are widely ranging and broadly encompassing, including the pillars of the faith, including the special days and circumstances that we commemorate, including the special people of Allah, including our brothers and sisters, and the bond of brotherhood that He has sanctified. Wa ayyamillah, the days of Allah, really all of the days are days of Allah, but there are special sanctified days. And in the month of Sha'ban, as we come upon the month of Ramadan, there's one in particular coming up in the 15th or the midnight of Sha'ban, Laylat Nisf Sha'ban, in which the Prophet ﷺ has reminded us and told us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will look upon all of His servants and slaves and forgive every one of them with the exception of two. One, the one who associates, and again, this is one of those points to make us reflect. Are we one of those two? God forbid. One who associates partners with Allah, a mushrik, and the one who has rancor for a fellow Muslim of the past or present. So this is very important. So in this blessed time, as we come upon Laylat Nisf Sha'ban, and as we come upon the first night of Ramadan, inshaAllah ta'ala, may Allah allow us, may He bless us in what remains of Sha'ban and allow us to reach Ramadan, that to receive the gaze of mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that night, and in both of those nights, that there is an imperative of forgiveness in re-establishing those ties of brotherhood. Of course, there's always context to situations in the real world. There's always considerations that may come up around harm and the degree of benefit versus harm in restoring relationships. And of course, those nuances are left to those who are in the circumstance to figure that out. But generally, from a principled perspective, this is the mabda, this is the starting point, that we should, if at all possible, reconcile, forgive, restore love, restore rahmah, restore that sense of togetherness and that oneness where we don't have an otherness, that you are me and I am you, and this is apparent. This is not something that we find in sort of New Age spirituality or is somehow brought to us from the Far East. This is in our tradition. This is the beauty of Islam, of La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And these realities, we can find them in the stories of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een. They were firm and they were actualized, true bonds of brotherhood that sometimes would amaze us. And we have these stories, right? We have remarkable stories that when the Muhajirin came from from Mecca to Medina, the Ansar would divide their properties literally in half, even their families in some cases. It would give them from their wealth as if it was nothing. We have the remarkable stories in one of the battles in which the Sahaba were dying of thirst. I mean, this is a situation that you have many licenses, rukhsas, right? Rukhas, that you could exit a situation through. They're dying of thirst. Water comes to them and they pass it around. We say these stories sometimes almost as if they're fantastical and they seem that way, but they're real. And it is from these realities that happened and that continue to happen throughout ages that Imam Al-Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi exposited 8 duties of brotherhood. And for the sake of time, we won't go into them in detail, but we'll mention them and then we'll mention a few comments about them. So he mentions the following 8 as the baseline minimum duties, and then that each of them has levels through which one can have taraqi or elevation to reach the epitome of love for one's brother for the sake of Allah. So the first is material assistance. And material assistance, of course, is, while not for everyone, the essential component of a stable life, it is for the majority of us, for the average one of us. It is the door through which we attain stability and can focus on the higher goals and purposes of life. And so material assistance is the first of the duties of brotherhood. And he says that there are 3 levels to this. And so we'll mention them and then we'll ask Allah to forgive us for falling short. But he said the first level is to give like one would spend on their servant or slave, mentioning their context, i.e. that they don't have to ask. That when you have a surplus in your account, in your property, in whatever you own, you give without them asking. They don't have to display a need to you. You simply give it to them because you know that they have a haqq upon you, you have a responsibility to do it, but you do it when you have surplus. The second martab, or the second level, would be that when you consider someone your equal, such as the Ansar and the Muhajirin, that when they would come to them with a need, again, without even speaking the need, but visibly, or they would know of a need, you have everything that I have, we split it. You can take from my pocket as if it's your pocket. My house is your house. Not just as a, humble welcoming, but it truly is. What I own is yours for the taking. And of course, the third level is what we referenced earlier, al-ithar, to prefer others above yourself, and we have many examples there as well. So Imam al-Ghazali says that if you go beneath the first level, that you wait until someone asks you, then really you have no bond of brotherhood at all, to be honest. And that, if we're honest with ourselves, is where most of us are. Most of us reside in that level. May Allah allow us to be elevated and to elevate all of us to the higher levels. The second of the 8 duties is personal aid. So material assistance and then personal aid. Something where if someone has a need beyond material, or even if it is material, but personally involving ourselves to assist them. And this is where in the hadith about how every one of our limbs and joints has a debt of sadaqah every day, the Prophet ﷺ explicitly mentions when you lift someone and help them onto their mount, that is fulfilling a sadaqah, one of the sadaqahs you owe. Of course, Salatul Duha fulfills all of those sadaqat, but as an example, that personal aid where you involve yourself directly, which is in many cases, especially when we have done this ourselves, it's more meaningful sometimes than money. Money can be given, checks can be written, but when you involve yourself personally with somebody in their time of need, we know it from when we've received it and they know it, it is sometimes one of the most beautiful things that can be given. The third and the fourth are interrelated and they relate to this object, which is one of the 2 objects that will take the majority of humankind to perdition, wal-iyadhu billah, which is the tongue. So holding one's tongue is the third, and speaking out is the fourth. So holding one's tongue in situations where you observe wrongdoing that doesn't need to be spoken about, or observe shortcomings or flaws that doesn't need to be spoken about, or in situations of anger when you could speak out, or even maybe have a right to speak out, and speaking out when you should and not staying silent. And then we move to more inner dimensions. The fifth would be forgiveness. And he mentioned this right after the tongue. Why? Because the tongue is that mechanism or that object by which we hurt each other so often. May Allah forgive us and heal our hearts from the gashes and the scars created by the tongue. That forgiveness in those kinds of situations, but also because Imam al-Ghazali speaks about relationships in such a high and beautiful form that when your brother, with whom you are supposed to be traveling the path to Allah, deviates from that path, that you forgive him for that deviation, that you don't hold that against him. In fact, he mentions that there are 2 opinions of the Sahaba, one held by one Sahabi, another held by another, Abu Dharr and Abu Darda respectively, that in the state of deviation, if it's severe, you should leave that friend because you don't want to be pulled with them. Whereas Abu Darda mentions this, the more latif thing, the more subtle and gentle and kind thing, would be to stay with them if you can. Imam al-Ghazali mentions 2 beautiful, beautiful situations, stories he mentions. One is 2 brothers who were very righteous from among Bani Israel. They descended from a mountain into a town, and they were trying to fulfill certain needs. And then one of them, he witnessed a woman for whom a passion was struck into his heart, and he went to her and spent time with her for 3 days. The other brother was so stricken by his grief of losing him that he didn't know where he was. He inquired about him for 3 days. When he finally found him, the first brother who had committed the sin pretended he didn't know him out of shame. But the other one kept embracing him, kept hugging him, trying to encourage him and say, by Allah, there's nothing that you could do that would make you fall out of favor or love in my heart. The 6th duty of brotherhood and sisterhood is prayer. Praying for your brother in their presence and in their absence especially. And this is one of, again, the beautiful dimensions of our faith that our teachers instructed us, that really from sincerity is that when you have a need or when you know of needs, to pray for others before you pray for yourself. And in that is a secret that your own needs are fulfilled. That the Prophet ﷺ has taught us that when you say a dua, when you make a prayer for others, the angels, they say Ameen and for you as well. So there is fulfillment of one's own needs in praying for others. The seventh is loyalty and sincerity, which speaks for itself. And the eighth is informality. And in informality, for those who speak Arabic or Urdu, this is the idea of no takalluf, not burdening somebody, not inconveniencing them, not making them feel as if this relationship has to go by certain rules and regulations and rights and responsibilities, that it's just brotherhood for the sake of Allah. And it's a chapter in which he mentions to us that we should avoid asking for any of the material support he mentioned in the previous chapters, even though it might be owed to us, and even though we might be fulfilling that right upon others, that we should suffice ourselves with the relationship for the sake of Allah alone, and if the brother prays for us, with that prayer as well. And so that eighth one is kind of, again, the apex of the duties come full circle. In embodying those duties, you yourself would be free of asking anyone of those duties. So here we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to fill our hearts with true, everlasting, ever-growing love for Him, for His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for His book, for His deen, for His people, and all of our brothers and sisters. Ameen. May we be given the tawfiq to implement and actualize these meanings with ihsan, and to contextualize them for our place and time with wisdom, such that we truly embody their spirit in totality and without misjudgment. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات يا أرحم الراحمين إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه على نعمه يزدكم ولذكر الله أكبر وأقم الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. نشهد أن لا إله